Hello, you're watching the second episode of the Vanguard's coverage of ASUCD series, and we are featuring student government leaders, Justin Hurst, who's the president, and Shreya Deshpande, the vice president, and Adam Hatefi, the external affairs vice president. Welcome to the show.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
So somebody was going to give an update on the food pantry situation on the campus.
I'll go ahead and start with that. In our last installment of this series, we talked a lot about food insecurity as one of the main topics, so it seems natural to bring that back up again. Our student-run pantry, which has been more or less a model for other universities, fortunately, they are this year going to be expanding their operations to operate during the summer as well, because as we all know, food insecurity is not a part of the year sort of issue, it's a year-round issue.
Yeah, so the pantry is going to be open all summer long, and it's from 11:30 to 5 p.m. Every day of the week. So if anybody ever needs lima beans or fresh produce or oral hygiene products, menstrual products, they're all at the pantry.
And where is the pantry?
Oh, it's in the Memorial Union. It's on the side of the Social Sciences and Humanities building, or the Death Star, that part of the Memorial Union.
Yeah, it's right in front of the bookstore area if you're unfamiliar with the campus.
And how would somebody go about getting food there?
So it's a little bit different depending on if you're a student or not. They have a point-based system linked to your student ID if you are a student. However, if you are not a student, they're not going to turn you away if you're food insecure. So you can still, as a member of the public or just someone from town, go to the pantry.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right. And so we're going to talk about mental health today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Shreya's going to cover
Absolutely.
mental health.
So just sort of expanding our discussion on just basic needs. Our executive team has been sort of closely planning how to combat different sources of insecurity, food insecurity, housing insecurity, and that involves mental health as well. So we have various mental health organizations on campus. We have the Mental Health Initiative, we have the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and the Student Mental Health Coalition that are all advocacy groups for mental health. And we host an annual mental health conference where we cover sort of different aspects of intersecting identities with mental health. And just updates on our counseling services. Now we hired 4 new counselors and are hoping to sort of expand that into CAN counselors so that students have access to community-based healthcare, which is super important, not just sort of a blanket therapist, but rather a community-centered like targeted mental health approach. So that's something that we will be working on this year. That's part of our vision to combat mental health insecurities.
And so if you're a student and you need to access those services, how would you go about doing that?
Absolutely. So the student, you can just Google UC Davis Counseling Services, and the website will pop up. There is an acute care services. We have urgent care as well. And then Monday through Friday, you can file a case with a case manager if you're in urgent care and need immediate attention, and somebody will get back to you within the same day. But our urgent care services are completely free. You don't need to show student ID. Any student can walk in, and it's always going to be free.
And if you're a student looking online, you can log into our campus portal Canvas, and you'll notice in the top right-hand corner there's resources in a red box.
Mm-hmm.
And how has this changed from previous years?
So for a while there was a lack of counseling on the UC Davis campus, and this had increasingly become a cause of worry for students. And so through lobbying efforts and through talking with the administration, through holding a town hall that the Mental Health Initiative and other advocacy groups organized in 2016, we got the university to sort of step up in its commitment to mental health for the students, and that's how we hired a new director for our counseling services, and in that process also hired 4 new counselors. And so we've really been sort of pressuring the university in a sense to increase their concern for mental health for students, because anxiety does not stop, just as the course load gets harder and harder and more students come in, we need to be able to have adequate services that meet the needs of all of our students. So that's sort of where we are in our efforts right now, and we're going to definitely continue to push the advocacy.
And just to briefly add on to that, I think you started to allude to another point there. Mental health issues don't really operate on a set schedule. So, for example, like if you limit your mental health resources to the working hours of the day, well, if you have a problem at night and you need to reach someone, what are you going to do? So one of our other focuses will be to address that lack of resources and apply it to more of a 24-hour time frame.
And of course, the university has been slow to make these changes in the past few years, and that is why we are still exploring our legislative options in changing having the state legislature change the rules on mental health. Last year, Senator Pan from the Senate Education Committee introduced a bill that would require a student to counselor ratio, which we supported, and we'll see what happens next year, but we're definitely keeping those options open as well. We're lobbying the legislature for better mental health services on all college campuses.
Absolutely.
So a couple of years ago, maybe it was even last year, I went to the town hall meeting and saw a lot of student complaints. Have most of those been addressed now, or are they still ongoing?
So they're still definitely, in the works, but as we said, sort of the increase in counselors have kind of quelled that, but there is going to be, the need still does not stop, and so we are trying to focus more on, again, community sort of based healthcare, having can counselors that cater to students' needs more specifically to give them the best care possible. And apart from that, our mental health conferences and other sort of mental health related events do not stop spreading advocacy and spreading awareness about mental health on campus. And anybody is free to sort of join and get more involved in the advocacy efforts, because the reason that the university has started changing is because of student pressure and student support. And the more that we continue that, building up that momentum, the more pertinent the need becomes, and we're just trying to get our university to cater to the students as best as possible.
Very good.
Yeah.
And so finally, we were going to talk about student housing, which is always a hot topic, especially here in Davis. So how are things going in terms of housing?
So we've made some strides, thankfully. The binding MOU between the university and the city and the county, which requires the university to absorb its own enrollment growth, has definitely been a step forward. What it does is essentially it mandates that the university provide housing for as many new enrollment as it gets every year. Saying, for example, if this year we have 30,000 students and next year we have 30,200 students, the university is mandated to build housing that would fit another 200 beds. That is definitely a step in the right direction. The passage of the approval of the Davis Life project in the City Council and the passage of the Measure J vote on the Nishi project were definitely steps forward for increasing the supply of housing in the city of Davis. Housing costs, however, are still very high, and the housing insecurity in Davis is still very high. A recent survey from that was conducted by a group of graduate students, the campus-wide housing survey, indicated that 18% of students at UC Davis have been housing insecure or homeless, and 7% have been homeless, sleeping in their cars without homes at some point. These numbers are staggering. This is an institution of higher education, and our students. The issue of housing affects everything else. If you don't have a place to live, you have higher anxiety levels. You're going to need more mental health services. You're going to have a harder time accessing food. So housing affects every aspect of a student's life, and that is why we are definitely putting a lot of our resources into ensuring that there will be more housing in Davis for students and for everybody else. This is not an issue that concerns only students. This is an issue that concerns the entire community of Davis.
I would say also, in addition to the supply constraint in terms of how many beds there are for students, it's also important to focus on the affordability. For example, you could add 1,000 beds, but if you're pricing every room at like $3,000 a month, then no one's going to be able to afford it. So it's important to also look at options that are cheap for students and affordable, especially for graduate students. From my discussions with their leadership, they are experiencing an even more acute version of the housing crisis, where rents for them are like super expensive. They're not justly compensated, and they're forced to commute from places like Sacramento.
And that's why in the projects that have been going forward, specifically both Nishi and Davis Live and Lincoln 40, we asked for, when the city council was deliberating, the student advocates, both from ASUCD and at the time from other student organizations, asked for a 555 affordability system, saying that applies to students as well, because a lot of the federal affordable housing statutes don't apply to college students, and that has been a historical problem in university towns like Davis, Berkeley, Santa Cruz, and so in the last few projects we've been asking for a 555 system, meaning 5% low-income housing, 5% very low income, and 5% extremely low income, all of which will have housing below the market rate. In addition, there are projects coming up. There's a project coming up that will be a housing project near the U Mall, the University Mall, which we will be advocating for, and which we will ask for affordable housing for students, again, as we always will. There are other things coming up. The city's measure JR, the measure that requires voting on landing designations and annexations of land for the purpose of development. We will be working on that as the expiration approaches in 2020, but we are looking forward to doing everything we can to make sure that our students have affordable, accessible housing in the city of Davis and on the campus, which...
Well, let me ask you this question, because one thing we talked about when we had an affordable housing forum back in April, we asked the university, well, how are you guys going to provide housing that's less expensive? And the answer was, we're not. And so, 2/3 of the new housing is going to be on campus as opposed to off campus, and it's still expensive. So, where does that get you guys?
So there's a big thing that is the determination of the maximum amount of loans a student can take out and on the financial aid that students receive. What the university does is that the university reports a cost of attendance, and it's a number that says, here's how much it's going to cost you to be here this year. That is the maximum amount to which a student can receive grants, loans, scholarships, and everything, financial aid, all of it. When the housing is on campus, the number is accurate. It reflects the cost of living on campus, and that cost is included in the cost of attendance. And so students who are financially not able to afford attending UC Davis are able to receive financial aid up to that amount. And students who are middle class or upper middle class are able to take out loans up to that amount. Of course, we have the student loan crisis, and that's a topic for another day. But it is possible to receive housing when the housing is on campus through loans and aid and grants and scholarships, because you can get up to that amount. The problem is when the housing is off campus, that number doesn't really reflect the market rate. The university reports a number that is based on a state survey that is supposed to happen once every 3 years. The last one was 10 years ago. So the university is forced to estimate some market rate based on a survey that was conducted 10 years ago. It's ludicrous. There was a bill in the state legislature recently, AB 710. I was there in the state legislature advocating for it. It passed the Senate Education Committee and it's going to the floor soon. And what it does is it mandates that universities look at the numbers that the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, releases every year, reflecting the cost of housing in each area, and include that in their cost of living estimates, so that the number isn't based on something that was conducted years ago. Hopefully, if that bill passes the Senate and is signed by the governor, it's going to make a big difference in how students are able to afford living off campus. When it comes to on campus, there are options at the moment. When it's off campus, there really aren't, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, just to add an anecdote to what Adam was saying, that situation that he was describing actually was me a year ago, where I was living off campus and requested more loans to pay for my housing, and because the university didn't think that it cost what it cost, my loans were denied. So this does happen.
That happened to me too, actually, a year, 2 years ago. Yeah. No, it happens all the time, and that's something that we're looking at fixing on a state level.
Yeah.
Very interesting. The other question I have is, as we go into this next year, there's no new housing coming online. So, but there are more students. So, what's going to happen with all of that?
That's a very good question.
So I know currently what the university is trying to do, just in terms of housing the incredible inflow of students every single year, is they're converting the double dorms right now to triples in the same space, which is a very short-term solution. Kind of, it's not enough for the amount of students that they are accepting, and there's not enough housing on campus itself, and then not even to think what'll happen after their first year on the campus, living on campus. So it is, personally, I mean, that's a cause of concern. It's, as more and more students do need higher education, it's also a responsibility of the university to make sure that they're housed properly and they have the proper resources. So I mean, if there's a legislative sort of approach to that, I'm not really sure how that could be happening.
The thing is, housing takes time to be built.
Right.
That's a big problem. And then there is the lawsuits, and there is the roadblocks. Many things happen that stop development projects from getting to coming to fruition. And there's really no way to rush it. The building has to be built. One thing that I will tell you is that this was the first year ever that the University of California, Davis did not guarantee housing for its freshmen. Wow. Freshmen have had housing guarantees forever, not this year. And that was because we didn't have enough housing for the freshmen.
Wow.
So this coming year?
No, the year that we just went through.
Last year.
I don't know what will happen next year because some student housing buildings have come online. The university has finished some development projects on campus in the Tercera area, and the Quarto units are almost. I think they're rebuilding those, and they should be finished soon. So we do have some on-campus housing coming online this upcoming year. It's not completely blank, but it's nowhere close to enough. And again, the fact of the matter is that the projects that were approved, Nishi, Lincoln 40, and Davis Live, they need to be built. Sterling is getting built. We have to wait for them to finish. There's nothing we can do until they are.
Well, it's pretty incredible. I did a tour of the three beds to a bedroom dorms a couple years ago, and it's like, hey, let's stick three beds into a closet. I can only imagine putting 3 beds in a room designed for 2 people.
Right.
Yeah. It was fun to live in a triple, that's for sure.
It was a very it was an interesting experience. And the cost of living in the dorms is ridiculously high. You're paying, I think, what is it, $1,200 for a bed in a triple bedroom?
Potentially up to 15, because the university bundles in your food plan with that. So if you want to have 3 meals a day, then that's going to get pretty pricey.
I know my cost of living, was just what, $10,000 just to live in the dorms?
We're going to be encouraging the university to change that cost as well at some point.
Well, that was my conversation with the university. We can't change the costs.
They have limits. To be honest with you, the university, if you look, people sometimes think, the university has so much money, but when you look through their finances, most of that money already has places that it needs to go. So the university doesn't actually have that much money, and for them to be able to continue building new housing, they're charging that much on students. It's not a good thing.
But at the same time, they're increasing the number of students that they're accepting every year. Again, without making sure that they have sort of resources that the students can have a decent campus life, a student life throughout their entire 4 years, which I would argue is definitely the university's responsibility. And it just seems that there's not enough response from their side, and everything that is sort of a result of student pressure. And so it's a lot of advocacy that definitely needs to be taken into account more, and we would hopefully see more projects soon like Nishi and Measure J.
And there's
I also feel like Oh, you can
There's another aspect to it which we're also working on. The state legislature regularly pressures the UC system to accept more and more students every year. Why? Because when their constituents' kids don't get accepted to college, they get angry calls. And then they come to UCOP and say, UC Office of the President, and they say, hey, you need to accept more students. And they do, because if they don't, they're afraid that their state funding will get cut, right? So we're working on the legislative side of it as well. I've had conversations with legislators on, hey, I know it's important to your constituents, but the system can't handle this. And we're having those conversations on a state level, and we're having those conversations on a campus level, but this is a very complicated issue with many, many moving parts. And hopefully we'll have a solution at some point, but unfortunately, this year is just the beginning.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly add on, I feel like this also opens the door to the larger two conversations, which I won't delve into for sake of brevity, of the importance of state and federal funding for higher education, as well as the prioritization of increasing infrastructure at the same rate you're increasing students. Because if you keep admitting students to the same limited resource pile, then you're only degrading the education quality of each individual student.
Absolutely. Which is why I think like it was so incredible for Gavin Newsom now to provide like a debt-free community college. He's canceled tuition for community colleges, and so I think for the next 2 years, if I'm not wrong. And I think that really like destigmatizes community college, one, and also encourages people to apply to the university at a later time so they don't feel pressured to come into a 4-year university, and our university can't handle that capacity. But you know, you have like amazing options like community college that are available and now that are being now fully funded. So hopefully we can work on something that like gets extended to covering student debts at a 4-year university level too, at a UC wide level. But it's very encouraging to see that our state legislature also supports students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you ever go to an education committee hearing, it's very clear that all the members that are there to help the students. They're not out to stop us from access to resources, which was actually a problem a few years ago. But now it looks like everybody on both the Assembly side and the Senate side are there to help, and that's definitely very encouraging. Every time we go there, it's pretty great.
Well, that's good. I think that will wrap us up with our second episode. This has been the Davis Vanguard talking with ASUCD. You can access us on davisvanguard.org and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Davis Vanguard. Thanks.